Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're venturing into the history of the Baltimore Crew.
That's right, an Italian-American organized crime group. They had quite a significant presence.
Yeah, and we'll be using an overview that really, unpacks their story from their beginnings right through to their connections in the wider underworld.
Exactly. And our focus isn't just on what happened, but kind of the significance, how this group took root and, well, changed over the decades.
So the story kicks off where else but Baltimore's Little Italy back in the 1920s.
Right, that was the heart of it, their home base.
And they weren't just a flash in the pan either. They were active right up into the 1990s. I mean, that's some serious longevity.
It really is. And right from the get-go, the structure is interesting. The overview mentions the core members, the made men.
These are the fully initiated guys, right? Typically Italian or Italian-American.
Exactly. They formed the inner circle. But then you also had associates who could be from different backgrounds helping out. Pretty typical structure for the time.
And size-wise, not massive, but focused.
Yeah, the estimate is around maybe 10 made members and perhaps 50 associates.
So influential in their area, definitely.
Okay.
Okay, let's get into what they were actually doing. The list is, well, it's what you might expect.
Gambling, extortion,
Prostitution, loan sharking that's lending money at crazy high rates, right?
fraud, drug trafficking,
Yeah.
and then the really heavy stuff, murder, corruption.
It paints a picture of a group really embedded in a lot of illicit activity.
Oh, absolutely. And that mention of corruption that suggests their influence went beyond just street crime, into the city's workings, perhaps.
Okay, now here's a really key piece. Their alliance. They were linked with the Gambino crime family.
Yeah, the Gambinos. That instantly puts them on a different level, connecting them to one of the biggest names in American mafia history.
So what did that alliance mean? Why were the Gambinos such a powerhouse?
Well, the Gambinos were based in New York. Huge influence, huge resources, nationwide reach. For a smaller outfit like Baltimore, linking up meant access to, well, more muscle, protection, maybe piece of bigger pies.
Makes sense. But the overview says initially the Baltimore Crew was independent, led by the Durso family.
That's right. Early days, they were their own bosses. The Duzos were running the show locally.
But then things changed. In the 1920s, the Corby family took over. Sounds like a bit of a shakeup.
It does. And the Corby name becomes really central to the story, even after the Gambinos get formally involved.
Which happened when?
1955. That's when Vincent Mangano, from the Gambinos, officially installs Louis Marici as the Capor regime in Baltimore, sort of their point man.
Ah, okay, so the Gambinos step in, but it's not like they just swept the Corbis aside.
No, not entirely. The Corby family, they still held key local leadership roles. They reported up to Marici, got support from New York, but kept their hands on the local reins.
That's interesting, a kind of integrated structure. Why do you think the Gambinos let them keep that local power, instead of putting their own guys in charge directly?
Could be a few things. Maybe the Corbis just knew the local scene inside out, had the connections. It's often smarter to work with established local power. Plus, it keeps the main New York family slightly removed, provides a buffer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And the overview really stresses this continuity. It says for most of the time after 1920, the Baltimore operation, sometimes called the Baltimore Casca, was basically run by the Corvus. First Vito, then his sons, Pasquale, known as Patsy, and Frank.
Their influence really lasted.
It certainly did.
Now let's look at some specific events. 1923 seems like a pivotal year. Patsy Corby gets life in prison.
Yeah, for the murder of a guy named Frank Naples. And Naples is described as a reputed Camorra member.
Camorra, another Italian crime group. So this hints at maybe conflicts, turf wars?
It definitely could. It shows the violence inherent in that world, and that maybe Baltimore wasn't operating in a total vacuum. There were other players around.
And the same year, 1923, another Corby brother, Tony Corby, he goes into hiding.
That's right, facing charges for murdering someone named Bell Lemons. He reportedly bolts Mexico, Italy.
It sounds like something out of a movie. Going on the lam?
Totally. It shows they had the means, the connections maybe, to just disappear when the heat was on. A common tactic back then if you were facing serious time.
But Tony Corby doesn't stay gone forever.
No, he pops back up later in the 1930s. But not in Baltimore. He's in Youngstown, Ohio.
Youngstown? Doing what?
Running a place called the Ohio Social Club.
A social club? You always wonder about those, don't you? Legitimate, a front, or just trying to start fresh?
You would be any of those, honestly.
Yeah.
Social clubs were classic fronts or meeting spots for organized crime. Maybe he was laying low but staying involved, or maybe setting up something new. Hard to say for sure from just that.
Okay, let's jump forward a bit. 1966. There's a change in the Gambino connection.
Right. Lou Marici, the capo installed back in '55, steps down. Health reasons, apparently.
So who takes over that link to New York?
According to the source, a Joseph N. Gallo starts managing the crew. So, the Gambino oversight continues, just with a different person.
And back in Baltimore, who's running the day-to-day?
Frank Corby steps up as the acting leader, reporting directly to Gallo now.
Again, reinforcing that Corby family dominance locally, even under the Gambino structure.
And Frank Corby eventually gets the official promotion.
Yeah.
Becomes the captain of the outfit.
So his leadership was cemented.
Seems so. Likely recognized for his experience and, loyalty to the larger organization.
But like all these things, it couldn't last forever. By the 1980s, things start winding down.
Yeah, the overview notes that by then, most of the known members had either died or retired.
Just faded away. Natural causes, maybe law enforcement pressure over the years.
Probably a mix of all those things. Aging leadership, attrition, maybe the criminal landscape itself was changing by the 80s. These groups often have a lifespan, a kind of cycle.
It points to that ebb and flow, doesn't it?
Definitely. Factors like police efforts, internal conflicts, even just changing social conditions play a huge role in whether these groups thrive or decline.
The overview also gives us a few other names associated with the leadership over the years, beyond the Corbis.
Right, names like Vincent Corona, Frank DeBen, Thomas Reds, Aversa, Benjamin Trotta, Magliano.
Gives you a sense of a wider network, different figures playing roles at different times.
And there's also a list of some historical members, with birth and death years for some. Joseph Nunzio Corby, Joseph Tamburello, August Tett, Nick Trotta Magliano,
And Angelo Munafo, Mario Orazio Anello.
Joseph Cigliotti, Frank Malvaso, Angelo Pereira. It puts a more human face on it. These weren't just abstract groups. They were made up of actual people. Some lived quite long lives, into the 2000s even.
Absolutely. And their story is tangled up with Baltimore's broader history, isn't it? The source mentions related topics like crime in Baltimore, history of the Italians in Baltimore.
Yeah, that context is crucial. You can't really understand the crew without understanding the community and the city they operated in.
How might that history, the Italian immigrant experience in Baltimore, have played a part?
Well, immigrant communities often form tight-knit networks, right? For support, culture. But sometimes those same close ties, that insularity, can also create environments where groups like this can form and operate maybe with a certain level of protection or, a code of silence within the community.
That makes sense. So wrapping this up, we've taken a real deep dive into the Baltimore Crew.
From their start in Little Italy, their early independence with the D'Ursos, then that long period dominated by the Corby family.
Right through to becoming essentially a branch office of the Gambino family, a really significant shift.
And we saw how the Corbis managed to maintain that local power, even with the Gambino oversight. Plus, the sheer range of their criminal activities, gambling, drugs, violence, it was extensive.
That Gambino alliance was really central, wasn't it?
Oh, for sure. Shaped their whole trajectory.
And then finally, seeing how the organization sort of faded out by the 1980s, closing that chapter.
It's a long and complex history, and it leaves you thinking.
Yeah.
Well, it prompts a final thought for you, listening. Considering this long run and then the eventual decline of the Baltimore Crew, what factors do you think really drive the rise and fall of organized crime in different cities or regions? And maybe more subtly, what kind of lasting mark do groups like this leave on the communities they were part of for so long?